She froze for a second, almost like she didn't believe what was happening. Then the applause grew louder. Row by row, people stood up. At Sundance, where crowds are famously tough, where standing ovations aren't handed out lightly, the invite had just earned one. Olivia Wilde looked out at the room, clearly overwhelmed, wiping away tears as the moment sank in. This wasn't polite clapping. This was real approval, the kind that hits after years of pressure, criticism, and constant headlines that had little to do with the work itself. For Wilde, this reaction carried extra weight. Over the past few years, her name had been tied to more controversy than creativity, with online debates often drowning out her actual projects. Every move she made was dissected, questioned, and turned into a talking point. So when the audience rose to its feet that night, it felt like something deeper than praise, it felt like release. A rare moment where the conversation wasn't about rumors, distractions, or drama, but about the film standing on its own. And what made it even more surprising was the kind of movie that caused this reaction. The invite isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It doesn't rely on spectacle or shock for attention. It's a quiet, tightly contained marital comedy with just 4 characters in a single setting. On paper, it sounds risky. But in that room, it worked. The laughter lingered. The silence in certain moments felt heavy. And when the credits rolled, the response was immediate. As Wilde stood there, visibly emotional, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a successful premiere. It was a moment of validation that many believed she might never get again. And the real story behind why this film hit so hard was only just beginning. What made this moment at Sundance even more unexpected was how quietly the invite arrived. No massive hype campaign. No loud controversy leading into the premiere. Just a small, carefully made film slipping into one of the toughest festivals in the world. Sundance audiences are known for being selective, sometimes brutally honest, and rarely emotional in public. So when this crowd reacted the way it did, industry insiders immediately took notice. At its core, The Invite is a marital comedy, but not the kind filled with predictable punchlines or glossy romance. The entire story unfolds around a single dinner between 2 couples. 4 people. 1 night. No escape. As the evening goes on, casual conversation starts to crack, and what's underneath slowly surfaces. Resentment. Jealousy. Power shifts. Things people usually keep hidden suddenly spill out in uncomfortable ways. The humor lands first, but it's the tension underneath that keeps. What pushed The Invite from interesting to unforgettable was how fast the mood could turn. One moment, the room was laughing. The next, it felt like the air had been sucked out. The dinner table became a pressure cooker, and every character seemed to be hiding something they weren't ready to say out loud. Critics later pointed out that this wasn't accidental. It was carefully built into the rhythm of the film, keeping viewers slightly off balance the entire time. Unlike traditional marital comedies that rely on exaggerated fights or over-the-top chaos, this one played it quieter. A look held too long. A joke that landed a little too close to the truth. A smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. These small moments stacked up, creating tension that felt uncomfortably real. Audiences weren't just watching conflict unfold, they were waiting for it to explode. Several reviews hinted that this restraint is what made the film hit so hard. By keeping the setting tight and the cast small, every emotional shift felt amplified. There were no side plots to distract you, no flashy edits to soften the blows. When secrets surfaced, they landed directly in the room with the audience. And that made people lean forward instead of pulling back. There was also quiet buzz around how fearless the performances felt. Seth Rogen stepped away from his usual comedic armor, leaning into awkward vulnerability. Penelope Cruz brought an intensity that simmered beneath the surface, turning simple dialogue into something loaded. Edward Norton played his role with controlled precision, making even calm moments feel unpredictable. Together, the 4 created a dynamic that felt volatile, like one wrong sentence could derail everything. But beneath all of this, there was something else viewers couldn't ignore. Many started to wonder how much of this emotional honesty reflected Olivia Wilde herself. Not in a literal sense, but in tone. In restraint. In the confidence to let scenes breathe without forcing a reaction. It felt like a filmmaker trusting the audience again. And as that realization spread through the room, the applause at the end began to make more sense. Because this wasn't just a well-acted dinner party story. It felt like a deliberate statement. And what that statement meant for Wilde's career was about to become the real conversation. By the time the lights came up, the reaction inside the theater wasn't just emotional, it was reflective. People didn't rush for the exits. Conversations started quietly, almost cautiously, as if viewers were still processing what they'd just seen. That kind of response is rare, especially at a festival where audiences jump from screening to screening. The invite didn't just entertain them. It lingered. Almost immediately, word began to spread beyond the room. Critics who caught early screenings described the film as unexpectedly sharp and disarmingly honest. Others noted how it sidestepped the usual traps of relationship comedies, refusing to hand viewers easy villains or clean resolutions. Everyone at that table was flawed. Everyone was partly right, and partly wrong. That moral gray area became one of the film's most talked about elements. And then there was Olivia Wilde herself. Watching her on stage during the Ovation, many couldn't help but read the moment as more than gratitude. For years, her work had been overshadowed by noise that had nothing to do with storytelling. Online debates, headlines, and constant speculation had turned her into a talking point instead of a filmmaker. Seeing her emotional response, some felt this was the first time in a long while that her work was speaking louder than everything else. Reports from inside the festival suggested industry insiders were paying close attention. Distributors, producers, people who quietly decide what kind of projects get greenlit next. A strong Sundance showing can change trajectories overnight, and the invite suddenly looked like one of those films everyone wished they'd discovered first. The buzz wasn't loud, but it was serious. What made this even more interesting was how restrained Wilde remained in the spotlight. No victory lap, no dramatic speeches, just a few heartfelt words and visible emotion before stepping aside. That choice, intentional or not, only added to the moment's impact. It felt grounded, human, almost fragile. And as festival chatter grew louder in the days that followed, one question kept surfacing: was this standing ovation just a single win, or the beginning of a much bigger reset for Olivia Wilde's career? What really fueled that question was the context surrounding this moment. For many viewers, the invite didn't exist in a vacuum. It arrived after a stretch where Olivia Wilde's name had been attached to endless online debates, side stories, and distractions that often overshadowed the actual work. Fair or not, her previous projects became magnets for commentary that had little to do with filmmaking itself. And that made this Sundance reaction feel different. Instead of noise, there was focus. Instead of chaos, there was craft. People began pointing out how deliberate every choice in the invite felt. The pacing, the silence, the refusal to over-explain. It was the kind of film that trusted the audience to connect the dots on their own. For some critics, that restraint signaled growth. For others, it felt like a quiet response to everything she'd been through, proof that she didn't need spectacle to be heard. There was also subtle chatter online suggesting this project was a strategic pivot. No big studio pressure, no franchise expectations, just a contained story with something to say. Some fans speculated that Wilde intentionally chose a smaller, more intimate film to remind people why she was taken seriously in the first place. Others argued it was simply the story she wanted to tell. Either way, the timing couldn't have been more perfect. What stood out most was how audiences reacted emotionally, not intellectually. Viewers weren't debating plot twists or ranking performances, they were talking about moments that made them uncomfortable. Lines that hit too close to home. Scenes that mirrored real-life conversations people avoid having. That kind of response doesn't fade quickly. It sticks. And at Sundance, that's often the sign of a film with legs beyond the festival. As the buzz continued to build, one thing became increasingly clear: the invite wasn't being discussed as a comeback in the traditional sense. It was being treated as a recalibration, a reminder. And as industry whispers grew louder behind closed doors, the implications of that standing ovation started to stretch far beyond a single night in Park City. As that recalibration started to sink in, attention quietly shifted to how this film came together in the first place. Behind the scenes, there were reports that much of the magic came from trust, between Wilde and her cast, and between the actors themselves. Several moments that audiences laughed hardest at weren't rigidly scripted. They evolved naturally, shaped by timing, chemistry, and a willingness to sit in discomfort rather than rush past it. Seth Rogen later hinted that the environment on set felt unusually open. Ideas were tested, lines were adjusted, silences were allowed to stretch. Instead of chasing the biggest laugh, the focus stayed on honesty. Penelope Cruz reportedly leaned into that freedom, bringing emotional intensity that wasn't loud, but impossible to ignore. Edward Norton, known for his precision, balanced that energy with control, making every reaction feel intentional. Together, the four created a rhythm that felt alive, not manufactured. What surprised many was how seamlessly Wilde moved between directing and acting. That balance can easily fracture a film, but here it sharpened it. Being inside the scene seemed to give her a clearer sense of when to pull back and when to let things unravel. Some festival chatter suggested this dual role gave her a new level of authority on set, less about control, more about clarity. This behind-the-scenes dynamic started to matter because it reflected what viewers were feeling on-screen. The film didn't feel like it was trying to prove anything. It felt confident enough to let moments breathe, even when they got uncomfortable. That confidence resonated, especially with audiences who had grown tired of overproduced relationship stories that feel emotionally safe. And as conversations shifted from what the film was about to how it made people feel, another realization began to form. This wasn't just a strong ensemble performance. It was evidence that Olivia Wilde had found a creative lane that fit her perfectly. And once that became clear, the industry response began to change in ways that would follow her long after Sundance ended. By this point, the conversation around the invite had moved far beyond reviews. What people were really talking about was what this film signaled. Not loudly, not aggressively, but clearly. For a while, Olivia Wilde's career had felt stuck in a loop of reaction and defense, where every new project was filtered through old narratives. This time, the work arrived first, and everything else followed. Some industry voices began framing this moment as a quiet reset. Not a redemption arc, not a dramatic comeback story, but a shift in how Wilde positioned herself. Fewer explanations, less noise, more intention. Instead of responding to past criticism, the invite seemed to ignore it entirely, focusing on craft, restraint, and emotional precision. That choice alone made people pay attention. There was also growing speculation about what this meant for her next steps. Reports suggested that several producers were already circling, interested in similarly contained, character-driven projects. Nothing flashy, nothing oversized, just stories that live or die on performance and writing. Fans online started debating whether Wilde had finally found her long-term lane, or whether this was just one chapter in a larger reinvention. What made the moment even more compelling was how relatable it felt. Many viewers saw something familiar in this phase of her career, stepping back, stripping things down, and rebuilding quietly instead of chasing validation. That emotional undercurrent gave the film, and Wilde herself, a kind of credibility that's hard to manufacture. And as Sundance buzz continued to ripple outward, one thing became undeniable. That standing ovation wasn't about nostalgia, hype, or headlines. It was about recognition. Recognition that something had shifted. And with that shift now out in the open, the final question wasn't whether the invite succeeded, it was how far this new chapter might carry Olivia Wilde next. But beyond career talk and festival accolades, what truly set the invite apart were the themes that quietly lingered after the credits rolled. On the surface, it's a marital comedy, but dig a little deeper, and the film explores truths most people try to avoid. Vulnerability, honesty, the subtle ways people hurt each other without meaning to, the unspoken tensions that simmer beneath every conversation. And it does all of this while still keeping the laughs coming, a delicate balance few films achieve. Audiences reportedly found themselves reflecting on their own relationships as the story unfolded. Simple gestures, half-finished sentences, and moments of awkward silence became mirrors for things many viewers recognized in their own lives. The emotional weight was never heavy-handed. Instead, it was embedded in character interactions, making viewers think long after they left the theater. That kind of resonance is rare, and it explains why the ovation felt so earned. Critics also noted how Wilde's approach allowed the story to breathe. No artificial cliffhangers, no exaggerated drama. Every beat felt deliberate, letting tension rise naturally. That restraint, paired with sharp writing and strong performances, created a film that sticks with you. It's the type of story that doesn't just entertain, It provokes thought, sparks conversation, and invites reflection. And yet, amidst all the praise, rumors and speculation began to swirl online, as they often do with high-profile premieres. Fans wondered whether elements of the story reflected Wilde's personal experiences. Reports claimed that the intimate tone of the film suggested a filmmaker finally willing to show herself in her work, if only indirectly. While nothing was confirmed, the buzz only added another layer of intrigue, keeping audiences talking and debating long after the festival ended. By the end of it all, one thing was clear: the invite wasn't just a film. It was an experience, one that entertained, challenged, and resonated. And for Olivia Wilde, it marked a moment where her work spoke louder than any headline ever could. In the end, the invite wasn't just a Sundance success, it was a statement. Olivia Wilde didn't just earn applause or glowing reviews, she earned recognition for the kind of filmmaker she truly is. After years of headlines, speculation, and scrutiny, this film proved that her voice, vision, and instincts can command a room without spectacle or gimmicks. The standing ovation wasn't just for a single performance or a single night, it was a signal that she had arrived in a new, more confident phase of her career. And while the festival buzz will fade, the impact of the invite lingers. It's a film that entertains, makes audiences reflect, and reminds viewers that emotional honesty can be just as compelling as laughter. For Wilde, this is more than a triumph, it's a quiet reclamation of her narrative, a demonstration that authenticity, creativity, and courage still matter in Hollywood. And as fans and critics continue to dissect every moment, one thing is certain: Olivia Wilde's next moves will be watched closely, and after the invite, they carry far more weight than ever before.